We do this live every Monday and Friday at 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. It's a show about technology and helping people work together. So if you're new to the show, awesome. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being our friend here today for this short period of time. For the next hour or so, we're going to talk with our friend Abe Fettig from Develop and Fix, popular for the one-of-a-kind Filmlab. And it's good to have you, Abe. How are you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
How's the weather there in Kennebunk?
We're having kind of a hot and humid day today, but I'm inside enjoying the air conditioning.
Hey, so you're enjoying both the analog and the digital right now. That's fair. Yeah, very nice.
That's right.
So to begin, let's kind of just go in. Let's start with the analog side of things. Our topic today is simulating analog technology in a digital world. And we thought that talking with you, Abe, would be great for this, especially with all you have going on. But let's start again with the analog side of things. What kind of film are you using right now? What kind of film stock and why?
My go-to for black and white. Any guesses as to what it's going to be?
Uh-oh. Maybe Ilford.
You got it. Ilford.
Oh, look at
that. I like Kodak films too. The only thing I really like about HP5 over Tri-X is that when you develop it, it tends to stay very flat. So it's a little easier to sleeve and scan. But I'm happy with pretty much any 400 speed black and white film. I usually push it to 800 for most things.
Do you do a lot of? Do you do a lot of street photography?
These days I do not. I live in a town that doesn't have a lot of streets, so I'm mostly doing just documentary photography of my kids and my family, and a little bit of nature photography. I live in Maine, so it's beautiful. You have beautiful trails and mountains and beaches. And for color, right now I've got a bunch of Fuji Superior that I got pretty cheap. But I would probably shoot Portra 400 if I could have any film for free. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, that's what I got. I got right here, the old 400. Probably won't focus for me, but yeah, I love that. It's such a good stock, and then you have so much versatility as far as I'm not gonna I'm gonna push it this way or push it that way, and you can usually get it to give you some pretty good results. Yeah. What kind of equipment are you using with those film stocks?
I brought some for show and tell.
Awesome.
Well, this is kind of become my summer camera. This is a Nikonos. I've got the IVA, but they're all good. This is a camera that was designed for scuba diving. And one of the things I was thinking about today, if you get to that topic about people talk about film versus digital, but I look at it as more like every photographic technology has certain properties which can be advantageous or disadvantageous depending on what you're trying to do with it. And this camera is amazing. It's totally waterproof. You can carry it into salt water, take pictures of your kids body boarding. You can swim underwater with it in the lakes and rivers. You don't have to worry about it getting wet. It's built like a tank. You can drop it on probably sand and rocks and anything else and not worry about it. It's got a beautiful 35 millimeter equivalent prime lens, which comes with it. You can get one of these for probably between $100 and $400, depending on the condition that it's in. And I don't think these days with a digital camera, I could find one that I could do all this stuff with, not be worried about it breaking, and still leave it on my towel and go swimming and not worry about somebody stealing it.
Yeah, you don't have to talk about weather seals on that one. It's done. It's finished.
Yeah, the weather seals are quite good.
I remember you told me, Abe, that all photography is analog at the beginning and end, and that just made me all of a sudden start respecting analog a lot more. Like at the lens and the eyes, it's still analog.
Yeah, and of course the physical world is analog, so the thing you're taking a picture of is reflecting light, and then at the end of the day, you're looking at your eyes are seeing some kind of light, whether it's reflective media like a photograph or a print, or being emitted from a screen. So there's a lot of interesting choices, and these days the fact that film has largely been replaced by digital, it kind of opens up a lot of affordable choices for film for certain kinds of photography.
Oh, that's awesome. And now, kind of, maybe we can explore that just a little bit. What kind of, I mean, you're bringing film, you're really like putting in an effort to bring film back and to be able to use it in a completely new workflow with Filmlab. Kind of what got you started thinking about that? Was it just maybe your hobby or your passion that you wanted to push forward out there a little bit further into the digital world, or how did that start, Abe?
Yeah, I was shooting film as a hobby, just for fun. And at a certain point, I started trying to scan it myself, like many people do who get into film. And as soon as I started using the software available for scanners, it was like clearly apparent that it was very old software that hadn't been updated in a long time, that was designed in an earlier era, and it was getting kind of long in the tooth, and it was really painful to use, and not a very enjoyable workflow. And most people who shoot film will say that scanning their film is their least favorite part of the process. So I was kind of kicking around ideas for a few years about building better scanning software, and then at one point we were in the process of moving, and so I didn't have even a place to set up a big scanner, and I was developing my film in the bathroom and thinking, I wish I could just use my phone and do some scans. And so that kind of started me thinking about mobile apps for scanning. And there's probably about a year where I would just like check the App Store every few months to see if anybody had built that app yet, hoping that somebody would. And eventually the itch just got too much and nobody else was doing it, so I started working on Filmlab.
That's awesome. And for those of you that not familiar with the fantastic tool that is Filmlab, you're able to actually scan your negatives with your phone and have some really fantastic scans. Like I've been using it for actually quite a while.
Yeah, it's been a super fun project to work on. And I think one of the things that I've enjoyed about it, but also found super challenging about it, is that it kind of bridges the whole history of photography. I'm writing like GLSL shaders that run on graphics cards to try to recreate the same process that people did with chemistry on film and photographic paper back in the day. So you kind of have to understand the way the original technology worked and the way new modern computer technology works. And it turns out a lot of the concepts are actually the same, and they really haven't changed that much over the years. So it's just expressing the same idea in a different way.
Like what concepts?
Well, I brought a little show and tell, for example.
Oh, yes, I can't wait.
So I was thinking about this conversation about the idea of recreating analog processes digitally. And usually what that means, first of all, is that you're recreating an analog process mathematically. Like you're trying to create a model that you can express just with numbers that reflects the reality of what's happening in the world. And usually the mathematical model is simpler and it loses a little bit of the nuance, but we try to build something that will convey enough of the original data that when a human observes it, they're going to have the same response with their sense. I think digital audio recording and digital photography are similar that way. So this is a book by Ansel Adams called The Print, and it's about making nice prints in the darkroom of your negatives. But there's an appendix in here. This is his test data appendix. And so these are called characteristic curves. They're pretty common in photography with film and photographic media. And this is based on measuring photographic paper. These are 4 different grades of black and white paper with different contrast ratios. So you have your input on the bottom, that's how much light you're shining on the paper. Then your output on the y-axis is how much density or darkness is being produced on the paper. And depending what you choose, you end up with a different result. But it looks very similar to the same curve tool you might have seen in Photoshop or Lightroom.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. Yeah.
And it's basically a one-dimensional lookup table. You've got one dimension of input and one dimension of output. So you could easily take this test data that was based on measuring the chemical response of photo paper and create a little computer program that would take an input and produce the correct output. And now you're digitally reproducing an analog process.
Wow.
So you've actually got models of different kinds of paper, like stored inside Filmlab, and then you can reproduce like what it would look like on those.
Yeah, I kind of did it the hard way, and the jury it's looking increasingly like that was the right decision, but it's probably created a lot more work than was necessary for myself. But the way Filmlab works is that it tries to simulate the process. So it's not directly making a lookup table from input and output, but especially in the case of color film, it's trying to recreate all the same steps that would happen in a darkroom. And if it all works correctly, the output should look the way that it would if you were using the same media that it's simulating. So color gets a lot more complicated than black and white. But for black and white, a lot of what it's doing is very similar to just the curve that you've seen there, where it's going to take what your camera is reading off the film, translate it into log exposure, and then run it through the right characteristic curve, and then do some output processing to make it look right on your screen.
And does that vary by format, like for 35 mil or for medium format? So you can do both with Filmlab.
Yeah, and it's actually the same because the film stocks work exactly the same way. It's just a larger size.
That's super interesting. And so when you decided, okay, I'm going to make this app, I'm going to, for basically something that I would like to have personally, because it's not out there in the market. So what kind of challenges did you face launching that? I mean, did you have a team of people behind you that are helping you make these simulations and these calculations, or were you working at home in the basement, so to speak?
Yeah, no, it was me. And it turned out to be a lot more work than I thought it was going to, which is kind of the story of most software projects, I think. I always say we would never do anything if we knew how much work it was going to be. So in a way, it's kind of a gift to not know. Yeah, I hadn't done any graphics programming. I really hadn't done a lot of math. People would always, sometimes when you say you're a programmer, people would say, oh, that must involve a lot of math. And I would always say, not really. But in this case, it actually did involve a lot of math, which I wasn't very good at, and I had a lot of learning to do. So it took quite a while just to get up to speed on that. Plus, it's a cross-platform. I'd done some mobile programming before on iOS, but just figuring out like what the architecture should be like to build a cross-platform mobile app so you can have a reasonable amount of code reuse across different platforms and get good performance. So it's been about 3 years from when I started to where I am now, which is getting ready to launch Filmlab desktop as well as mobile. And I feel like I've just kind of gotten to the point where I have a good, solid foundation where everything is in place to build a cross-platform app, and I can start to make changes and then deploy them across all platforms at once.
That sounds super interesting. What is I mean, I've used Filmlab, the app, but is it different functionality for the desktop application, or are there any differences? How does that interface work?
Well, the desktop app, it's really designed for people who are using a nice digital camera with a macro lens on a copy stand, which is how a lot of people are doing their scans these days. So you end up with a bunch of raw files, which are photographs of your negatives, and then you need a way to convert them to a positive and get a good result. So it's taking the whole image processing engine that's in Filmlab and making it available in a desktop app for those applications. And then eventually, there's a lot of interesting directions that I would like to take it. One of which is getting live tethering working, so you can actually have your camera getting a live video feed of the negative that you're about to take a picture of, and then be converting it on the fly. And all those things are possible to build now because I do have a cross-platform image processing engine with good performance that's geared toward converting film. But it took a while to get that up and running for sure.
I can only imagine. That's awesome, though. And that would really help. I would kind of bridge, because I know that there's a lot of people, especially like on YouTube and stuff like that, that are, you know, a part of this like vanguard of analog photography and pushing that kind of thing. And I know that there is that kind of struggle there between like, okay, I want to like say there's a special occasion like a wedding. I want to shoot a wedding. I have this, you know, like a M6 that I'm using something, you know, but I want to be able to have those images processed and scanned quicker for delivery. And so there's a huge, there's like an aesthetic choice that people are making, I guess you could say, but then they also want that versatility of a digital workflow.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. The state of film scanning is very interesting because it was all developed in the 90s when the film to digital transition was happening. And it was built based on the limitations of software and hardware that was available at the time. And a lot of things really don't make sense in today's world, but people are still doing them because those are the tools that we have. So that example you mentioned, like a wedding photographer who sends all their film to a lab and has it scanned. If that person were shooting themselves, they would probably be shooting RAW and their files would have a ton of flexibility. But because they're sending them to a lab, the lab can only deliver them JPEGs. And so all the decisions about like exposure and pulling highlights and shadows and all that stuff has to happen at the lab. So there's an employee at the lab going through all their photos and making edits to them, and then they're sending them JPEGs. But the actual digital files that wedding photographer is getting are missing a lot of the original information that was there on the film. And if they want to make a different choice, like change the exposure of one of the prints, they have to actually physically rescan the film to get a different output. So if you were building a workflow today, the way Filmlab and other more modern scanning tools work is that you would do a raw scan where you preserve all the information or as close to all the information as possible from the film. You never discard that. And then you have a workflow based on non-destructive editing where you keep your original file and you just apply your edits on top of it. So hopefully that day will come, and hopefully Filmlab is contributing to it, that all film scanning will use a more modern workflow, and whether you scan yourself or send your photos to a lab, you'll be working with raw files.
On that same topic, Abe, is there any resolution gain that's kind of explicit going to a photographed negative as opposed to a scan? The reason I'm saying that is because on the scan, there's like, it's working a little bit more close up, I guess, is what it seems like in my brain. I don't actually know too much about how scanners work, but just imagining the difference between like pointing my camera, you know, at whatever distance from it versus being like slapped right up against the sensor thing. Is there anything that's like inherent in that, or it really just depends on the exact equipment?
I think it depends on the equipment, but overall, if you just think about how much progress in resolution there has been in digital cameras over the last 10 or 20 years, you can pull in a whole lot more resolution a lot faster using a modern digital camera than you can with a scanner.
That's cool. Does that apply equally as far as like, I mean, would you get the magnitude of gains from like macro photography that you might get from doing like panoramic techniques? So like I do a lot of digital panorama technique because I can't afford a digital medium format sensor. So I fake it and end up with this very unexisting field of view for every single picture because I made an arbitrary choice about which lens to be on that size of a sensor, which doesn't match up to anything. It's APS-C, and it has some adapted 35 millimeter film lens on it. And then I'm taking those, stitching them together, and I'm getting this massive resolution of like, 9,000 pixels. And that's huge, but it's, it's assembled off of these smaller pieces of a sensor. Would that same technique potentially enhance your results with this kind of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other interesting thing you can do is you can get super resolution by stacking multiple exposures. So your sensor,
awesome.
Your sensor has that grid of pixels on it, But if you make a bunch of exposures with shifting it slightly, then you can start to interpolate the detail between the pixels and get a higher resolution image.
I never thought of doing like an HDR technique like that on film negatives when you're scanning it, but that is genius. I do that technique in the panorama photos I do because they're at night and I don't have the dynamic range that I want. So I have to do, I settled around 5, but just because of the amount of work processing it is all of them. But that is awesome that you could do that with negatives as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So if I can just kind of nerd out on this for a second.
Do it.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Definitely.
Color film is an amazing technology. And one of the things that makes color film awesome is that it has a huge latitude. Color film itself is a very low contrast medium. So if you look at your actual film, it's lower contrast than real life in terms of what gets recorded on the film. And because of that, there's a huge amount of range to overexpose, because the reality of the dynamic range in the scene is getting compressed into a smaller dynamic range on the film, and therefore you can move it up and down without hitting the boundaries of what the film is capable of exposing. So that means when you are making a digital print of color film, which is what you're doing when you're scanning film and converting it, then you're increasing the dynamic range, you're increasing the contrast, you're amplifying what's there on the film. And because of that, it means that, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't need a lot of dynamic range to capture color film, but you do need a high bit depth so that you can accurately record all the subtle differences that are there on the original, because then you're going to take those subtle differences and amplify them in your output.
That makes sense.
So noise becomes a real problem. If there's noise in your scan, that noise is going to get amplified in your print. Or if your capture device doesn't have enough bit depth to capture the nuances, then you're going to get banding and things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's super fascinating application of this stuff. I've always enjoyed the idea of film photography, but found it problematic for all these reasons you were mentioning before, of like having a tech go make your JPEGs for you and send them back and then do some sort of delivery of that to somebody else and feel like it was something I actually made completely. But that is so cool to imagine taking just like kind of an affordable camera and then getting massive scans of it with resolution. But the raw file stuff for the bit depth is super cool too. So like if I had a 16-bit raw file, that's going to perform better than if I'm trying to do something like 8, accidentally leaving Photoshop in 8-bit or whatever.
Yeah, if you have, it's good. You're definitely going to see artifacts and have some issues. It gets, the fact that film is grainy does kind of hide some of those issues, but you definitely need more than 8 bits to scan film well.
Is there a popular platform right now for people to base their scanned photos off of? Like, is there a line of cameras that you see very commonly used as like, this is my negative scan camera for the folks that are doing that raw photo version of the conversion?
I don't think there is. I think a lot of people, and Sean, I don't know if this is something that you dabble in, but it seems like a lot of photographers are not purely film or purely digital. So a lot of them will have a digital camera on hand, and so they'll use whatever camera they already own to scan their film.
Yes. So, what I said during the pre-show is the best camera that you have is the one that you've got with you. And so any posts that I've seen on Reddit that are guys or anyone, guys, girls, who are doing their own scans with their digital camera, it's usually like, a 3D printed or, a Home Depot or Lowe's built rig, like an erector set that, has a backlight, a slide carrier, a macro lens. They slide either the film strip or the slide in, but every single one of these, it's like it's difficult to actually find one that's pre-made because everyone scratch builds it for whatever camera they have on hand. And so what I've been doing is, since I was really excited to hear about Filmlab for the desktop version, because I heard about it when it first came out, but I've been sending my film out to a lab on the West Coast in California. They're literally the only guys I've been able to find in the world that scans your film and then hands it back to you as a 96 megapixel raw DNG file. But that doesn't do any good for the slides that I want to scan, because I have all my dad's old Vietnam combat photography, all of his old slides, and I was super excited for Filmlab to see Filmlab come out, because I want to scratch build a rig with my slide sorter to have my Canon EOS R pointed down at my slide sorter, so I can then go, from slide to slide to slide on the sorter, and then use Filmlab desktop. But because the idea of the mobile app always turned me off, because I'm just a stickler for having the highest resolution raw data available to me and then downsample from there. But yeah, so I just love what you're doing with the software. Like, I'm so glad that Elliot asked me to join the show today, because I didn't know you'd released a beta of the desktop version. So I'm super happy.
Yeah, I'm super pumped about that desktop too. I'm like, ever since I found out about raw files, I just turned my nose up at anybody touching JPEGs. I was just like, what is this noise? And I was on Linux back then, but like, I have given in and moved to Mac for doing stuff. But yeah, I used to be a real snob about it, but now I've gotten more reasonable.
Yeah, the line. Should I mention the lab on the West Coast that is returning raw, or?
Yeah, I'd love to know.
I'm super curious to hear about it.
Yeah, so it is Adrian Bacon from Simple Photography Services. So his website is adrianbacon.com. And it looks like a default WordPress site. He's like the equivalent of the hole-in-the-wall 3-table sushi restaurant that nobody knows about. Because you look at his website, it just looks super simple. But he has a film review, and I'm just looking at the page now, a film review tech sheets page that gives you all of your exposure compensation you want to use for shooting analog in order for him to return the best 96 megapixel raw file. And he's also doing, from talking with him, he said he hasn't open sourced his stuff yet just due to lack of time. But if you ask him how he does it, he just answers all your questions. And he does a similar HDR type thing of processing each color of scanning each color channel separately and then merging them together. So yeah, nice. Adrian Bacon, Simple Photography on the West Coast. So Abe, you should definitely get in contact with him and see if you guys can join forces somehow. Since he said the main problem for not open sourcing his code was just not having the time for it and creating a publicly consumable version of it.
So do you know that DNG file he gives you back? Is that does that have full color information for all 3 channels?
So I haven't looked that closely using EXIF tool, and also the only shots that I've gotten back have been black and white, my black and white film scans, because I'm only shooting black and white right now. Yeah. And so I don't know if it's 3 interlaced channels making 96 megapixels, or if it's 96 megapixel on each channel. That I don't know.
Well, that sounds awesome. Thanks for the tip. I'm excited to see what he's up to there.
Yeah. Have you? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, it's just, if you don't mind me asking, can I ask Sean a question?
By all means.
So one of the things about film that I think is a cool advantage in certain contexts is the fact that you end up with a negative that was in the place at the time. So you talking about your dad's Vietnam slides, do you feel almost like you're time traveling when you look at one of those and like you think, I'm looking at the exact little piece of film that was in my dad's camera at that moment that he took that photo? That's exactly
how I feel. Sorry if I get a little choked up, but after he passed away, when I was going through all of his slides, that is the exact thought that went through my mind, is that I am holding the physical piece of plastic that was in this location at this time. And even to the point where his slides were developed by the Army. The Army had a film development service with Kodak co-located in Vietnam for combat photographers, and the fact that even the fact that the little film tray or the little slide trays come back with that, processed by U.S. Army, blah blah blah, Vietnam Kodak photography services, that just also adds to the appeal of just the physicality of having the slides from my father. So yeah, sorry, long answer, but yes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I was going to ask the same, or kind of like go into that same thing, because I can see, especially with the developments that you have done, Abe, with your software, I've seen this on a couple of film photography influencer people, but I see that like there has been this renewed interest from like people like maybe from Kevin's background, who's always worked in digital, shifting or kind of putting their foot in the water to this analog side. Do you have you seen that to be the case? Like, have film stocks and cameras kind of, I know they're not making, not a lot of people are making brand new film cameras, with the exception of probably maybe 2 or 3 manufacturers that I can think of offhand. But have you seen that change just in the time that you've been making Filmlab?
Yeah, definitely. I think you notice just walking around in the world that you run into people carrying film cameras more often. So anecdotally, a lot more people are shooting film. I had done some business planning, and I was trying to do some research about a year ago to see the state of film photography, and I forget exactly when the inflection point was, but it definitely is on the rise now. So companies like Kodak and Ilford are selling more film every year than they were before. Obviously, there was a long time that there was a downturn. It hit bottom, and now it's on its way back up.
I've noticed, like with I noticed for me personally, with using trying to source a film camera, has been like, it used to be you could find an awesome, like what Sean has sitting up there on his in his shot there. You used to be able to find those for like $50-$100. Now it's like $400.
Is that an F3?
Yes, it is. It's my dad's old F3 that I got when he passed away. So yep, it's an amazing little piece of camera. But yeah, exactly what you just said. Used to find these on eBay for $150, and now they're $800 to $2,000 as collector's items. Same thing for Necromats. They used to sell, which is like the stripped down version of this camera by Nikon. Used to sell for $35-$40, and now they're $300. It's insane. And then same thing that the the EOS 1V, the 35 millimeter pro body that I use from the late 80s, early 90s. It's sold new for $2,000 or $3,000. I bought it on eBay before the analog resurgence for $300, and now they're back to $2,000 on eBay. So,
yeah,
it's crazy the way stuff fluctuates like that. I ended up getting to upgrade to digital medium format because I had been trying to acquire a film medium format rig, and I had a Hasselblad body that was pretty old. But I had paid like $230 for it off of eBay in like 2008 or something like that. But when I moved to Seattle about 10 years ago, it got stolen. And I had renter's insurance, and when it got appraised, they appraised it at like its full market, like MSRP or whatever price that Hasselblad still prints that it cost. And I gave them a receipt from eBay and everything, but they ended up giving me like the full antique appraisal price for this body that I didn't even have a lens for yet. And so I got into video because of that theft, actually, and having renter's insurance. But it's hilarious to me. I was like trying really hard to get into film 10 years ago, but I just gave up on it after I switched to that video stuff.
It was the wrong time, Kevin.
Now that I can do like giant res stuff with the equipment I already have, that's pretty interesting to me, because the film stuff really isn't that expensive to shoot the negatives. It's all the developing that gets crazy.
That's for sure. That's the next thing, Abe, that's on your merging analog and digital. Could you just do a one-stop shop for the developing side of things?
I probably won't, but I think I would like to see the cost of developing come down a little bit. And I think people don't realize how much human labor is involved, even just in the digital side of what happens when you send your stuff to a lab.
Can you guys describe that a little bit? Like, I know a bunch of you on this call are like do developing, and you've been talking about darkrooms and stuff, but I honestly don't know how any of that works. What's involved with that?
Well, first you put on a dark cloak, you get in a dark room.
Yeah, so it's like I haven't done my own processing or developing in years, but yeah, generally you have to start out in a completely 100% dark room, like in the movies or TV shows where you see someone in a dark room that either has like a red or a yellow light so they can still film the shot. That really only works in the black and white printing side of things, but when you're doing the actual processing of your film, be it black and white or color, you are in a completely dark room. You're working completely blind, fingers only. So you load the film, the entire strip of film, into a film canister, drop it into a film and processing canister, and then you follow the instructions for chemical development. And so really the only point that you do there, or the only changes you can do there, is changing your processing time and then your temperature for processing, which you can do is called pushing or pulling your film. So that's like the equivalent of a digital camera, where, say, like with a digital camera, you shot a scene at ISO 1200 and you just use your slider to increase or decrease the exposure. You can do the same thing with film after the fact, by pushing or pulling the film, either by changing temperature or time, just like you'd slide your ISO. But where the real manual labor comes in is during the scanning process. If you take your film to a big box store or a pharmacy, chances are it's just the equivalent of running the film strip through the scanner, scan the frame, auto levels, auto contrast, whatever. It's like the equivalent of just smacking the auto button in Photoshop. It doesn't really do much smarts. It just says, okay, what's white, what's white, what's black, what's gray, and this is what I think the shot should look like. But when you're dealing with an actual film lab, that's when they're scanning your shots, a technician, it could take 5 seconds, it could take 30 seconds, it could take a minute, is for every single shot that they're scanning, they're looking at that shot and playing with the levels a little bit just for what that particular lab technician thought the scene should look like. And sometimes that lab doesn't match, or sometimes that technician's idea of what the scene should look like doesn't match your idea of what the scene should look like. And that's why I like this lab on the West Coast that hands back, raw files so I can do those changes myself. But if you get back JPEGs, you're kind of stuck with whatever the lab chose. Yeah, so that's what the other exciting thing of having the Filmlab app is you can change all that stuff on your own as it's coming in. So it looks like an awesome project.
And in the 50s, like, it was also like, a good photographer, it was even for like print, for news or whatever outlet, it was like, okay, the photography or your skill in capturing the picture was one thing, but then a lot of them developed their own film. So it was like their skill and development. And there's a couple documentaries out there I'll put on Discord post show, but of some pretty interesting techniques that some of these guys use, some of the processes and chemicals they use to do some basically like live action editing on their negatives.
Yeah, definitely. And also, like, when you're actually talking about those photographers then sending those prints off to magazine or press for actual publishing, they're not just sending the negatives. They would then be doing a print. And so that would be like the equivalent of Photoshop, where someone says, oh, I like analog because it's so visceral, there's no Photoshop involved. Well, every photographer worth their salt, or every photographer worth their salt during the printing process, they're dodging and burning. And so whereas you have your negative in a carrier with the light shining down through the negative onto your photographic paper, is that you do your very first exposure on the paper, and then once you get that dialed in as okay, it looks pretty okay, then you would actually take your hand or a tool or a piece of cardboard with a hole cut in it, and you would actually allow more or less light depending on what part of the print it is. So say I took a shot in a dark alley of someone, but I wanted to highlight someone's face on a print in Photoshop, you just take your brush, click, and raise your exposure for that particular part of the face. With actual analog prints, you do that exact same thing, but by controlling light, where you do your main exposure, but then you want to boost the face. So you just kind of, go like this with your hands or a piece of cardboard and only let more light shine on where that person's face is. So it's
painting with light.
Oh, I think we lost your audio there for just a sec there, Sean. But yeah, it's awesome, and it looks really, really cool once you do it. But yeah, and in that same vein, like all the kind of somebody that's like idolizing these older photographers, older film photographers for being pure. It's like, okay, well, there's always technique into it. Just like with digital photography, there's always technique involved. I do want to spend just a moment since we have Abe on and Sean with us. Chris, would you mind showing us the equipment you're using right now?
Well, currently I'm shooting all digital, but I've been struggling with some of the creative process and getting stuck on my LCD screen, So I have been just shooting some disposables for fun. Now, the quality of this is not so great. I haven't developed any just yet.
Does the flash work?
Oh yeah, flash works fantastic. But it's actually quite fun to shoot, and it just kind of takes a lot of the variables out of it, and just kind of gets you back into just composition and focusing on that kind of stuff, which I felt like I kind of needed. But I'm really wanting to start shooting with this Canonet that I have acquired through a friend of mine who gave it to me as a gift. It's a fully mechanical, I believe, with the exception of I think there's an exposure meter in here that takes like a kind of a funky battery that doesn't really exist anymore. But you can get an adapter for it, or just not use it at all, and just kind of know how to expose for the light you're in if you're that good. So I think I'm going to start shooting it again. It's a Canonet QL17. It's like the G3.
And it's a fixed lens?
Yeah, it's a fixed lens. It's a 1.7, 40 millimeter. It's a 40 millimeter 1.7. So I'm super excited about it. So that's that one. I also have this this is a great camera just for like parties, or just for times where you don't really want to bring a big expensive camera. The beach, you just want to like document. It's an Instax Mini 8 Fujifilm, which we got for like super cheap, but it takes a tiny instant film stock. I think I have it right here. It's a just mini film. So you can't Abe, is there any way to what would you recommend for scanning something cheesy like this in? It's not going to be the greatest quality, but if I wanted to do something digital and get that into my computer somehow, what would you recommend for something like an instant?
Well, I mean, so first of all, that's a super fun setup you have. All three of those cameras are great. It makes me want to just go out and shoot just looking at it. But I usually, I haven't really tried to do archival scanning of Instax prints. I usually just snap a picture with my camera, with my phone, and edit it. But you probably could use, I'm not entirely sure about if any issues with glare or reflection you would have, but you probably could just use a flatbed scanner and get good results.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm kind of curious about that.
I do, I have this guy. This is one of my favorite cameras.
Oh, is that a Polaroid field camera?
It's a Polaroid
land camera.
The land camera, yeah, and it uses the film that they don't make anymore. Fuji was making film for this called the FP100C, and this is what it looks like. Here's a sample.
That looks great.
It's a rangefinder. It's hard to get precise focus on it, but they have a great look, and it's kind of a shame they don't make the film anymore. I've got probably 5 boxes left in my fridge.
That looks amazing for instant.
Yeah, I think there's it's really sad how Polaroid not only went out of business, but pretty much their technology died with them. But fortunately, Fuji, I know Polaroid Originals exist and they're okay, but Fuji does a nice job. And I think there's increasingly people trying to make more high-end cameras that use the Instax film, because it really is great film.
I wondered about that for a long time, is what is the barriers? It might be market demand, it might be lots of things. But it's so strange to me that you have such a cool medium as those Instax, both mini and regular size, and then there's like 2, 3 cameras, maybe 4 if you're really digging, that will accept them as film. But I'm curious, do you have any opinions about what I've never dug into, like, why don't people make more of these? But I have gotten stumped on trying to make my own for sure.
The thing that I'm the most excited about on that area is people making adapters for medium format camera backs. Like, I think, and maybe Sean, I don't know if you know about the state of things, but I've seen people make like Hasselblad adapters and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know the details. I was just psyched when I saw people doing this. But the format of the print that you just picked up, is that like a standard medium format back, like you'd use on the back of an RZ or RB57 or something?
That is a little bigger than. It's kind of like between medium format and 4x5. I think it's like 3x4 approximately.
Okay. Yeah, that looks about the same size as the Polaroid backs that we used to use on the medium format cameras in my dad's photography studio, because obviously we'd have to see stuff out in the field. And so I was really psyched to see people starting to try to take Impossible Project. So Impossible Project, 10 years or so ago, they bought up as much of the old original Polaroid processing plant hardware to create the Polaroid film. The problem is that, you know, they were having difficulty recreating the formula. So I don't know what the current state of things are, but I do know that there were lots of side projects taking like the Impossible Land Camera and SX70 and 600 instant film that they're making for Polaroid cameras and trying to get those to work in a film back for medium format. So that's not the Fuji Instax. I wasn't familiar with people making Instax backs, but I know people were trying to get Impossible Project backs going. I just don't know what the current state of the project is.
I saw someone on Instagram, I forget their exact handle, but I want to say it was Cameradactyl was the name. But he's like a mastermind 3D printer apparently, and has been 3D printing these lens adapters for film cameras to like be able to sandwich like just some random, you know, film lens onto another camera that it wasn't really made for. But I think connected to that, he has made some custom fed Instax type adapter stuff. I'll try to find that and put it in the Discord. I forgot about him, but he does some really advanced printing with like bronze materials that, you know, it looks like you almost have a metal print at the end of it with camera stuff. But that's cool. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, but that reminded me of that. I got to go look and see what he's built into that, because I would love to actually experiment more with instant stuff.
Yeah, and that's been, it's also the cost of entry, where one of the reasons that I just didn't immediately just go out and buy a bunch of the Impossible Project film packs for my old SX70 Polaroid is that it's just so expensive, where since it's taken Impossible Project so long to reverse engineer Polaroid's chemicals, that it's like, you know, you're talking, you know, anywhere from $2 to $5 per print when you're buying, like, it's like the single film pack with 12 shots is like 38 or 48 bucks. So I'm, you know, really, really hoping more companies jump on board with trying to bring analog back, but.
And there were some quality issues too with some of those earlier versions, I know, and so it kind of scared off some people from really kind of pursuing that super heavy.
Yeah, that was the big thing, is for the first 5 years, it's like they actually had to make this part of their marketing campaign of unique one in a million shots, because every single, you know, film pack you got was of a different quality, had different color balance. Some would even change color when exposed to light because they weren't fixed properly. Or fixing is the process of making it so an analog print stops getting darker as it's exposed to more light. And so those quality control issues up, you know, towards the beginning definitely scared off a lot of people, thinking that Impossible Project is, well, for the pun, is still impossible, even though they are making, you know, absolutely amazing consistent films now, or instant film now.
Abe, I think we.
Oh, go ahead, Miles.
Oh no, I was just saying. I thought I saw you earlier. Want to contribute something there? Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was trying to chat away while on mute. I was just going to say, film is the thing about film is that it's just an amazing technology that was developed and refined over a long period of time. And part of what still gives it advantages in certain situations now is that, like, I think film is about 200 microns thick, like a fifth of a millimeter. And that's a full frame sensor that is flexible and pretty tough. And to do the equivalent digitally, it would just have to be a lot bigger, and would have different properties. So the fact that they were able to develop this is amazing, and took a lot of smart people a long time. And that's why, like, Polaroid had many PhDs working full time on their film back in the day. And now it's hard for a small company to try to recreate that kind of technology with a lot less resources.
Yeah, that's interesting because, and I think that's also kind of what I mean. Like you brought out, it's like that's what helps with the kind of create the allure of film photography too, is because it's like a typewriter. Like these things are not going to be made again, and the amount of time and resources and effort that went into the design and development and upkeep of them will not happen again, at least not in the same way. So it's like one of those. It's like a living timepiece almost.
Yeah, it's kind of miraculous from our modern perspective. And that's actually like the piece about it's an interesting time to be into film photography because the industry has changed so much, and a lot of not just the technology, but the business practices and the way companies were built were designed for a different era when film was much more high volume. And so for anything to work today, like you can't make a film before. You could make a film scanner that cost $100,000 and you could sell a high volume of them, and people were going to process so much film that they would make their money back. And that business model does not exist anymore. So to build a film scanner today, it's got to be a lot more DIY and using existing materials, and you're not going to have the same kind of customer base you did then. But the good side of that is that there's a lot of room for creativity, and there's a lot of small companies and individuals doing interesting things and sharing their work online. Yeah,
and there's a big, I mean, I think there's too is still a push, like I think we were talking about a little bit earlier, Abe, it's like with the physical medium, right? I mean, because people aren't reading, for instance, they're not reading on an iPad all the time. They're still buying books, they're still like picking those things up. And so there is still that inherent interest in a physical medium. And I think that will not go away, especially we have like people on, influencers now that are that have thousands and thousands of people that watch their videos. They're putting film books together and selling them and selling out of them online. So I think that the format itself is definitely going to stay, whether it's going to be what shape it will look like, especially after things like the desktop version of Filmlab and how that'll probably add to the influence of change. It'll be super interesting to see.
Yeah, and every technology, I think a lot of times when a new technology comes along, we see it has advantages in certain respects, and so we think it's better, but it's not better at everything. It's just better at certain things. And like an example you mentioned, if you're going to go to the beach in the summer, would you rather bring your iPad or bring a paperback book? Like there's probably many advantages to the print paper technology that works better in that situation.
Definitely.
Yeah, it is definitely, a right tool for the job thing. And it's just what I said before about cameras. The best camera is the one you've got with you. Is the same thing. Going to the beach, I would much rather have my iPhone in my pocket than my giant, EOS R and battery grip, or, EOS 1D or something. But just going back real quick, I didn't jump in immediately because I was actually looking up the name. But as far as what you said about, developing a $100,000 film scanner that's actually going to be used, the issues right now is a lot of film scanning labs are going out of business, not because of lack of demand, but because really the only mass marketed and affordable film scanner out there was the Nikon Coolscan. I believe it was the 9000 model. It was last produced, years ago. Sold new for $2,500, and they're selling on eBay for as high as $10,000 right now. just because they're so rare, and they know that if a photo lab needs a new scanner, they need a new scanner now. And it's either that or jump up to like a $15,000 or $25,000 Hasselblad scanner. There's a company called Plus Tech that does make an affordable scanner. But based on the quality I've seen from those, you might be better off with Filmlab and scanning, or Filmlab desktop and scanning with a DSLR or mirrorless camera. So.
Yeah, I'm super interested in actually trying to experiment with a small, like that same type of programming you would use to run a CNC off of like a Raspberry Pi or like whatever would run a 3D printer, you know, where you've got a grid system and you're mapping it out. Take something like an APS-C sensor camera and use that to do a grid scan. I gotta get a lot more space to build that in my non-darkroom size house, but man, that'd be so awesome to have one of those things at your house to be able to just like do super high-res scans.
It would, and then especially if you take that and shoot some large format, shoot some 4x5 or 8x10. I mean, the amount of I don't even know how much resolution you could theoretically get out of something like that, but it's got to be massive. My
mind runs away with me with that Tim's Vermeer thing, because when you see him build a room-size camera obscura, it's just like the potential for interesting creations out of the nature of light itself is so incredible. And so like figuring out which one of these little things skill-wise you have to tackle or solve to be able to expose that like variable of it is super fun.
Yeah, talk about that Tim's Vermeer documentary. It is super interesting, and to see the results he gets too from that process is pretty crazy. But I wish we have just a few minutes left, and I kind of wanted to pick Abe and Sean, both your guys' brains, anyone else obviously that wants to add in. But if you're going to start, you say, okay, I really want to start this process. I want to get in touch with my analog roots, and get a camera, get some film, start shooting, start documenting these moments in time, and then to use to develop and scan later. What would you recommend people maybe start with?
I can dive in, and so I will be the first to admit that I am a complete gear addict. Where I always look at the latest and greatest kit that comes out. But with that said, I'm also a proponent that don't stress on your gear, and it's like the best camera is the one that you have with you, that I keep saying. So if you are getting started for analog, if you do want to go down the actual SLR route of 35 millimeter cartridges in a camera form factor that's similar to a DSLR, don't stress about the body. Because whether you have the latest and greatest high-end 35 millimeter camera built by Canon, or little teeny tiny Pentax, whatever, all it essentially is just a little timed curtain that opens and closes to let light through. Focus on your lenses, focus on your film stock, but don't really worry about the body, because you can always upgrade your body later. And so if you currently have Nikon or Canon DSLR gear, then see if you can find a Nikon or Canon film body that works with your existing lenses. So that way you're not completely replacing your system. And that's really the main thing I have to say is, don't stress about trying to figure out all this kit that you need before you start. Just buy a cheap body, that works with some existing lenses, and go from there.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's good advice. You can definitely get into film pretty easily, and you can start from wherever you're comfortable from. It's kind of interesting that for a while the prices were super cheap on like the 90s plastic DSLRs, and I think now the prices are starting to go back up on those again, because it's actually a great way to shoot film. They're really easy, and they're autofocus, and they work very much similarly to a digital camera. The other approach you can take is there's a lot of interesting, weird nooks and crannies in film photography, and using film, you can do something that you would not be able to do with your digital equipment, or have a totally different workflow than your digital equipment, like shooting instant film or shooting large format. You can get here, one of my show and tell cameras. These are still available for like under $100. This is a little Nikon point and shoot, and it fits in your pocket. So you can have a full frame camera that you can carry around with you and take snapshots in your everyday life, or get a medium format TLR and play with that. There's a lot of chances to use cameras that are that work a totally different way, or that are a very different experience shooting film than you'd be able to do with affordable digital equipment. So that's kind of a fun place to take your photography in a different direction.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Abe, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And Sean, thank you so much. It's been a really good conversation, and really nice to have you guys here on the show and your insights.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
That's good to be with you. So that'll be it for our show today. We do this again. We do this every Monday and Friday. On Friday at 12 p.m. noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, we're going to talk about the process of hiring remotely. Hiring someone remotely when you're never even going to meet them face to face or work with them face to face. It's what's going on right now, and so how to do that successfully so everyone feels that they are onboarded properly, and we can have that same connection that you would perhaps in an office setting. We're going to talk about that, and then so we invite you to join us for that. If you want to be on the show, if you have some thoughts about that, join us on Discord. We'll post a link in the chat here. It'll be good for about an hour, so feel free to join us, talk to us, be our friends. We're real people, we promise. So other than that, we thank you so much for joining us today, and hope you guys have a good day. See ya.
Thanks, everyone.